I believe that if you restrict so much freedom, where let's say a society pursues equality to the maximum, or has the idea that, or has the preference for security and equality rather than wilderness and freedom, so to speak. If you're going to restrict freedom too much, you're also restricting individual liberty, essentially, and you're restricting also individual progress. Now, of course, you can also raise the question why, despite our efforts of equalizing certain qualities of our society, we still end up with having a hierarchy. And if you want to dig deeper, I can tell you that equality never fully succeeds because we are not developed, or we're not, at least from my perception, from my understanding, we are not necessarily designed to be equal on every single level, dimension, and so on and so forth. Which means, in other words, that we automatically crave for hierarchies, we automatically develop hierarchies, we need a certain leader, we need a certain organization. That also applies to the question why, the richer get rich and the poor get poor, for example, is because eventually we can start out, everyone is equal, we all have the same money, but if we let all the individual subjects mingle among themselves for a particular period of time, we trade, we exchange, we buy, sell, exchange information, and so on and so forth. Eventually, there will be only a handful of winners and a massive load of, let's say, losers. I don't want to really say losers, but let's say people who end up with very little amount of things, possessions, materialistic possessions, so to speak. And only a handful of people end up being, let's say, very wealthy. And you can actually prove that, or perhaps not prove, but let's say you can discover that in the burials of ancient people in Paleolithic times, when you saw a lot of massive graves with people who were buried with absolutely nothing or very little amount of possessions, because oftentimes it was a ritual for people to be buried with gold, with certain tokens and other possessions that these people had for them personally. And you saw a lot of people in mass graves who had very little amount of possessions, and then you only saw just a handful of people with a lot of possessions, a lot of gold and silver and bronze and all the other things that they had. So what I'm trying to say is that it is perhaps in our human nature to not be equal and rather be in a very competitive dominant hierarchy. That's how I would maybe classify or define it. But that is not exactly, let's say, the question to equality in it of itself. We're talking here equality in terms of having equal opportunity, which is what I said in the beginning, where everyone starts at zero, let's say, or at a certain amount of level, right? Like a universal basic start, let's say. And in the end, we see who wins, because essentially we are competitive beings. And it's like we can imagine if everyone starts at the starting line in a race, let's say a running competition, everyone has the same start, the same line, the same distance, and we see who runs faster, and the first one to finish the line first wins, rather than the other way around, where everyone starts at different measurements, and in the end everyone comes at the same line at the same time, which is not exactly a productive, or it's more of a, let's say, a counterproductive nature for us human beings.